The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting an amber glow over the sprawling cityscape. Office windows glinted like a million stars come to earth. Sidewalks buzzed with hurried footsteps, while the rhythmic hum of engines and the distant wail of sirens wove into the city's endless song. Landon Mercer adjusted his tailored cufflinks as he stepped out of the grand oak doors of Le Jardin, an upscale restaurant that catered to the city's elite. His mind still echoed with the discussions from the business meeting that had just concluded. Deals had been made, numbers dissected, and agreements signed. But none of it mattered at this moment. He exhaled, smoothing the lapel of his charcoal suit as his gaze found his car. The gleaming obsidian Bentley Continental GT that rested at the curb like a panther coiled and ready to pounce. The car, a symbol of all his years of relentless ambition, of every deal closed and every sleepless night, sat polished to perfection under the early evening glow. But then he saw it. Something made Landon stop cold, his stride faltering. His eyes narrowed. There, slicing through the flawless sheen of the driver's side door, was a deep jag scratch. It ran cruelly from the front fender almost halfway across the car, cutting into the immaculate paint like a fresh wound. For a long moment, Landon said nothing. His jaw clenched tight, his pulse thundered in his ears. His hands curled into fists at his sides, the cufflinks digging sharply into his skin. And then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7 or 8, stood frozen beside his car. Her dark curls were tangled, her face pale as snow. Her tiny hand clutched a rough stone, edges jagged, and her knuckles were white from gripping it too tightly. Her lower lip quivered as she stared at the damage with wide, frightened eyes. Landon exhaled sharply, forcing his heart rate to slow. He knelt slightly, adjusting his posture to appear less imposing. His voice, when he spoke, was measured but unmistakably edged. "What did you do?" he asked. The girl flinched. Her large brown eyes brimmed with unshed tears as she swallowed hard. Her voice came out small and broken. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Landon rubbed his temples slowly, feeling the beginnings of a headache pulse behind his eyes. This couldn't be happening. A scratch like that. He knew it would take thousands to repair. He didn't care about the money, but the principle, the violation of it all. Before he could speak again, a woman came running down the sidewalk, breathless and disheveled. Her thin arms scooped the little girl close as she gasped for air, her chest heaving as though she'd run for blocks. "Aria!" the woman cried, her voice high and frantic. "What did you do?" She turned to Landon with pleading eyes, her thin frame trembling. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered. "Please. She's just a child. She didn't mean any harm." Landon lifted a hand, silencing her with a simple gesture. His gaze dropped back to the girl, Aria. "Why?" he asked softly but firmly. "Why would you do something like this?" Aria clenched her tiny fists at her sides, her chin trembling. She glanced nervously at the woman, her mother, clearly, before she mumbled, I needed you to see me." Landon frowned. His brows pulled together as he studied the girl's pale face and wide eyes. There was something more here, something that made him pause. He glanced up at the woman again, and that's when he noticed it, a thin plastic bracelet clinging loosely to her wrist, stamped with the name of a nearby hospital. He saw the exhaustion etched into her hollow cheeks, the quiet desperation clinging to her like a second skin. The air between them seemed to thicken. Landon's world was one of precision, of polished negotiations and predictable outcomes. He had expected a child's carelessness, perhaps mischief, but not this. He crouched lower, leveling his gaze with Arias. "Why did you need me to see you?" His tone had softened, but there was still a steady weight behind it. Arias sniffled, her small fingers curling into the fabric of her mother's tattered sleeve. Because nobody else would stop. Landon's chest tightened in a way he hadn't expected. The woman, Aria's mother, closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they glistened with the sheen of restrained tears. She seemed to gather herself, her hand rubbing absent-mindedly at the hospital bracelet, as though trying to make it disappear. I lost my job months ago, she said quietly. My husband, he passed away last year. Her voice caught briefly, but she forced herself to continue. I've been working as much as I can, cleaning, serving, anything. But it's not enough. Arya, she's sick. She needs surgery. Landon stayed silent, letting her words sink in. We don't have insurance, the woman continued, her voice growing weaker. I've applied for every program, every charity I could find, but they all said no. I didn't know what else to do. Arya wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, her small shoulders sagging. I saw your car, she whispered, and I thought, maybe if someone rich like you got mad, maybe you'd listen. Landon glanced back at the deep scratch carved into his car door, then returned his gaze to Arya's tear-streaked face. Just hours earlier, he'd closed a deal worth tens of millions. Repairing his car was pocket change. But for this little girl and her mother, it seemed they had wagered everything on one desperate act. He took a slow breath and stood. Sliding his wallet from his pocket, he flipped it open and drew out a card. The woman tensed, no doubt expecting him to demand payment. Instead, he extended the card to her. Take this, he said quietly. Be at St. Catherine's Hospital tomorrow morning. I'll make the arrangements. The woman stared at him, confused. What do you mean? Landon's gaze softened as it shifted between mother and daughter. Your daughter's surgery. It's covered. There was a beat of stunned silence. The woman's hand shot to her mouth as she gasped. Arya's eyes grew round, disbelief flashing in their depths. But why? The woman stammered, tears welling in her eyes. You don't even know us. Landon's lips curved into something that was almost a smile, but tinged with sadness. Because some things, he said softly, matter more than money. Arya burst into tears again, but this time they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope. The woman clutched the business card like a lifeline, her fingers trembling. I don't know how to thank you. Landon rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Just take care of her, he said. Arya blinked up at him with big, curious eyes. You're not mad at me? He followed her gaze to the ugly gash marring his car door. It was still there. It would still cost a small fortune to fix. But in this moment, it no longer seemed to matter. No, he replied gently, crouching beside her again. I'd take 100 scratches on that car if it meant helping someone like you. Arya giggled softly, wiping her nose again. It's a really nice car, she whispered. Landon chuckled. Yeah, but it's just a car. He tapped her nose lightly. You're worth way more than that. The woman sobbed quietly and pulled Arya close, holding her tight. And Landon felt something shift inside him. Something unfamiliar. Something good. Tomorrow, he reminded them, standing again. Be there early. The woman nodded vigorously. We will. I promise. As Landon turned back to his car, he pulled out his phone and began dialing. Arrangements would need to be made. He had people for that. But this time, he wanted to make sure he followed through himself. He opened the driver's side door, but paused when he heard Arya's tiny voice behind him. Mr. Landon? He turned. Arya hesitated, then gave him a smile that, despite her tear-streaked face, shone with something bright and pure. When I grow up, she said softly, I want to be rich like you. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Gonna buy a big car, too. She shook her head. No, I want to help people like you do. For a moment, Landon stood frozen. Out of everything she could have said, that was the last thing he expected. He felt something loosen in his chest. Something soften. With a small nod, he climbed into his car. The scratch remained. Ugly, prominent, but meant something now. A reminder. As he drove away, Landon realized something that he hadn't felt in years. He didn't just feel rich. He felt good. And sometimes he thought the things we believe matter most, money, success, perfection, mean nothing in the face of simple kindness. The real question is whether we will recognize it before it's too late.